back to the Sleeping Grush podcast brought to you by Cardboard Corner Cafe. John, it's been a minute.
Has been a minute. Several.
It's been a couple minutes. Our wonderful producer, who's usually just right here and ready to go, has spent the last couple of weeks on a beach in Mexico. He didn't take us. We weren't invited.
No, I know.
So we kind of stranded. He's on the beach. We're landlocked. But we're back finally. Just a couple of days before Christmas is when we're recording this. So happy holidays to everybody out there. And we have got an amazing show for you today. We have a wonderful guest with us, Mr. Matt Green.
Hello there. Welcome. Thanks for having me.
Happy to have you.
Welcome. Yeah. We really appreciate that. And today we're going to talk a little bit about what Matt does for the company and really about our production process. That's what we're here to
Making models.
talk about. Making models.
Making models.
Yeah.
Yep.
So Matt, tell us a little bit about yourself and how you came to be with this bunch of misfits.
Well, I'm retired from the Army, so I've got some connections with Jon, our illustrious creator, founder.
Would you say professionally, or is that a word that
Professionally, yeah.
We were bending around beforehand.
Yeah, generally professionally,
Yeah.
sort of loosely used, whatever.
For another several months. Yeah.
But we played some other games. I had a game company, still have a game company called Laser DreamWorks, where I was making laser cut wooden ships and things. And as we bumped into the store one day, we talked about potentially doing wooden ships for Fully Blades. That was 10 years ago, I think. But we somehow he roped me into the game, and we played in the first tournament back 10, 11 years ago.
Right. He played the Founders Tournament.
Yeah, he has
the Founders Point. I had forgotten about that.
And
that famous photograph.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I was kind of on the periphery of the company for, I don't know, 6 years or so. We started making the wooden we started with acrylic tokens and then went to wood tokens, and I was doing some side projects. And then at some point, I can't remember what the real impetus to it was. It was a World Anvil, maybe,
Yeah.
I think so.
was the sort of thing that brought me in. I was playing around with that at home, and I was like, they could really use some organization to some of the lore, and maybe this might be the
We still
thing.
can, by the way.
Yeah,
Well,
that never ends.
So I came in and started working that, and then we started doing other things. Then I kind of learned more about the company and how things were being made and produced. And then Siocast sort of popped up as a thing that I felt like I needed to be involved in.
Did you learn about Siocast through Firelock? Who'd you learn about it from the very first time?
Ooh, that's a good question. I can't remember if I learned about it and talked to Mike about it, or if Mike learned about it and talked to me, but we were both exploring it about the same time.
Like yes, from Firelock, yeah.
Yeah, because I make some of the wooden I make all the wooden rigging kits for them. But the two of us kind of, and there's several others in the group that all kind of follow emerging tech. And so as new things come out, we kind of watch it and go, is that something we need to replace an old process with? Is it merit or not?
Right.
And then we kind of follow it. And eventually one of the people in the group, there's 6 or 7 of us that sort of compare notes. We'll go, yeah, I'm finally going in. So somebody takes the head, experiments with it, and leads the way, and then others sort of drag through the process. And so that's sort of short history.
Yeah, short history.
Now, I remember a meeting though, because we had always wanted to explore plastics because our customers, when we started, this is the history lesson part, but when we started years and years ago, all we knew were metal, and none of the original people were sculptors, right? We knew people who were in that business. We had been playing with metal figures our whole lives. Plastic was out there, but it wasn't our preference.
Yeah.
But we don't, as we moved along, you don't make the thing that you want, you make the thing your customer wants.
Of course.
Customers more and more wanted us to go into plastic models. But I remember a meeting where we had been talking about, and we gathered a bunch of examples of different, companies, processes, and different methodologies, where there was a sprue of models in those examples that was Battlefield.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
And when I discovered that, remember I called Pete Simonovich that night,
Right.
Or I texted him. So, but leading leading up to that, Siocast had come to the booth at Gen Con before you joined us, one of their salesmen,
Yeah, it's probably.
you know? And so it was like, I've heard about it twice. Matt's talking about it, you know, from your circle of,
Yeah.
you know, manufacturing professionals. And we had encountered these guys at a
Right.
con.
Right.
And we knew that we wanted to get into this, and it kind of all came together, right?
Yeah.
Through you. Yeah. So,
Yeah, definitely. So, right now, like, if one of our listeners gets onto Discord, they're going to see Matt, DGS SioMaster, right? So
Yes.
tell us a little bit about that. That's what you do for the company.
Well,
You know, that's the big thing you do for the
yeah.
company. So tell us about your mastery.
Well, when I
Matt,
when I
tell us
first
about your mastery.
when I first put that out there, I was probably making stuff up. So yeah, I mean, like, you know, like anything, when you first get brought into a craft, people will tell you how easy it was without remembering their learning curve.
Of course.
And so then you do the first couple ones, and then you immediately have like regret that you've bought into this because you quickly realize that there's more art and less science to it, and that you're going to have to figure out ways to get past the things that aren't working like you expected them to work. But then, you know, as with everything, the more you practice, the more you learn, the more you develop your own techniques and your own methods. So I think I'm like maybe 120 molds in now. And I look back on some of the first 10 or 15 molds and go, what was I thinking? Okay, how did that work? Or I go back to a couple of them and go, oh wow, I forgot that worked really well. I should still be doing that. So master is probably a misnomer. There's certainly some folks out there who are infinitely better at this than I am.
Yeah, but you were an early adopter.
Yeah,
Tech, and you followed it through several iterations of their tech, right? Through different their different plastics that they've come out with, and upgrades to their stuff, and you're learning, and you're now on the cutting edge of all that.
kind of. I'm probably a second wave guy. So the first folks that bought the machines were pretty experimental, and Siocast has done a great job of continuing to modernize the machine, and they've got some new stuff coming out that I'm a little jealous of. And so the machine is getting more reliable as it goes. And one of the things I like about the company is that they're continuing to find ways to make the base machines more useful, and more efficient. When I were the machine, the order I got all had the new Siocast, the harder pellets. There was some frustration with early users about the softness of the material. They went back and they re-engineered it and produced another, like a hardening mix that you put in there. It makes it a little less, I'm going to use the word spongy. I don't know if that's the right word.
You're the master.
But one of the complaints of the early on was when you tried to like file it or carve it, that you would get burrs or fuzz.
Right.
Some people described it. And so now this new hardening stuff allows it to be a little bit more like plastic you might get in like a Tamiya tank model kit or something.
Right.
Which is a whole different process, a whole different kind of plastic.
Sure.
So I'm probably a second wave guy, but I'm early in that second wave.
Yeah.
And
as an example of first wave, be Galador.
Galador.
Yes.
Battlefront.
Battlefront was early on. I think Monster Fight Club, some of those guys.
Yep.
Were early on. And then some European companies.
Sure.
Because it starts over there. And then so second wave, Firelock has been using it. The tank guys, Trenchworks. We all kind of jumped in on about the same time with it. So I know of probably, I don't know, maybe 20 companies in the States that I'm kind of aware of using it regularly.
Right. So let's take a step back from what you just said, and let's talk about how all this integrates with DGS. So the first medium that DGS used was
white metal.
And we did that process for how long?
So we started making models prior to the release of Free Blades. So say 2010.
Okay.
Our first models come out. We had some prototypes at the end of 2009 to 2010 because we hadn't released a game yet. We were making the models as prototypes to introduce. We talked about this in a previous podcast, right? Where those were going to be models for the example adventure for Brightsword because we were going to do the role-playing game first.
Right.
Then we changed that plan and took the models that we had and made a few more and made the first 4 faction starter box releases, right? So metal first, and that's what we knew, you know.
Sure.
And the person on the team at the time, this is ancient history, was Jason Moore, right? And he knew the guys at Valiant and had done some work with them. And so they were our foundry, they were our spin caster. They still are for the metal models, right? So
when did, I'll put you on the spot here. When did you know that we needed to switch to plastic models?
when did I
When
believe?
did you personally know?
Oh, really early. Yeah.
Why?
Because that's what the broader community of miniatures gamers wants.
Right.
You know, I mean, they're just used to that. And of course, if you're competing with a larger company that has access to, you know, the kind of volume where they could do injection molding, and they've got their own shop like they do in Nottingham or they're doing it out of China, you know, that's what people are buying. You know, is these boxes full of sprues of injection molded plastic. And that's, you know, how come you're not doing this, right? I mean,
Right.
that's what the customer sees. I mean,
Sure.
you don't care that you know, don't have that kind of volume or staff at this point.
Right.
They want their, whatever, the medium that they want. So, and there's whole generations, and we're not going to talk about why, but there's whole generations of gamers that think that plastic is all there's ever been. And when they encounter a metal model, they think why would you change to metal? That's really weird, you know? Or they've never made them out of metal before, like they were doing since the 60s, whatever. But, you know, so
we're not dating ourselves at all.
we're not, yeah. we're in that world, and those are our customers, and we got to take care of them and give them what they want.
John and I are both old enough that we started when the miniatures were lead.
Right.
And then in the mid 80s and the lead community and lead-based paint became a thing, and the community had to figure out how to go pewter. And there was a period of 4 or 5 years in the mid 80s where the older gamers were really not happy with the tin or
Brittleness
pewter
of white metal.
because the white metal was brittle, and it took a long time for the industry to kind of sort itself out to get a
You know, it's
level of
just an
metal
interesting
that was-
aside about that. They actually won that case, right? There was a big class action about lead and gaming miniatures, and the game industry gathered together and fought as a group. You know, they pooled their resources and battled that case because you'd have to, like, you know, lick 10,000 models to get a level of lead. There's some ridiculous scientific,
to get to the center of the
you know, right, yeah, to get to where, you know, oh, we just did a test. We fed a rat 800 cans of Diet Coke and he died. Well, you feed me 800 cans of Diet Coke, I'm going to die too. So the science wasn't there to produce this as a threat, especially since you're not supposed to ingest them. If I ingest a knife, I will die. We can't stop selling knives. So they had a common sense argument, took it there and won it, but they paid a lot of money to win it. And the industry kind of said, all we did was buy ourselves time.
Right.
We got to transition because we're going to keep getting hammered with these lawsuits until we have to give up. So let's start moving on it now.
You know, it's crazy because I came in the mid 80s to the modeling scene, to the toy soldier scene, right, where things were already the white metal, right?
Yeah.
And then as I got into it, maybe a decade later, the plastic started, right? And there was this other revolution going on. And I remember these first plastics coming out,
Right.
and my metal catalogs all of a sudden didn't mean anything.
Yeah.
You know, multi-pose.
We even called it lead. We refer
Yeah.
collectively to your miniatures as, you know, what are you bringing for lead tonight? You know,
Interesting.
That was the thing. And that's another thing. That's how you can tell what kind of gamer a person is. To a historical gamer, they're figures. To a miniatures gamer that isn't an historical gamer, they're models. But to a role player, they're minis.
Interesting.
Not exclusively.
Right. I
It's
use
enough of a trend that you can tell generally, like in the booth when you're
Right.
talking to someone.
right.
You know, that's just an aside for
Oh, that's interesting.
But it is, you know.
I use at least a couple of those terms pretty interchangeably, but it does kind of tell where I came from.
Right.
Within the hobby.
Well,
Before
yeah.
we-
And so as people start talking about their preference for metal or resin or thermocast, which is different than resin, or the injection molding plastic, which is a different kind of
Both of
plastic,
those, yeah.
either of those, and whether it's drop cast or spin cast or injection molding, all those different preferences mean something to the manufacturer, but are just preferences to the,
Right.
the average.
Right.
customer.
Yeah.
And you and I were talking about this before, Matt, before we started recording, about the people's preferences and how the industry keeps changing, right? And how we're trying as a company to be on the cutting edge of that, to bring the best possible product to our customers. So let's talk a little bit about we can, like, Siocast, what it is actually, and the process to spin a Siocast model. And then maybe talk a little bit about its pros and cons compared to some of these other methods.
So Soundcast fits in the middle between traditional metal spin casting and traditional injection mold making. So that kind of used to be that if you were a large company, eventually you went to injection molding because you had the volume and it was way more efficient to do millions of them if you knew you were going to sell millions of them.
Right.
And then it made sense to go to have, because the mold for injection molding plastic, the high end stuff, is going to be a metal die cut precision CNC milled mold that may be in two parts. It might be in 2 or 3 or 4 parts for the really expensive ones, and those are costing tens of thousands of dollars to
Right.
make one of those things.
Right.
So if you're not selling hundreds and thousands of figures, you're never getting your money
Right.
back.
Yeah.
And then you kind of have to do a sprue, like the multi-part sprues,
Yeah.
right? So that you have a leader and a flag bearer and all. So the Perry miniatures, the
Right.
Warble, those guys can get away with it if they know they've got the volume.
Yeah, let's talk about that just for just
Yeah.
a second. Let me just kind of hold you up. So we see the larger companies, GW and Warlord and folks like that, yeah,
More games like
making using that process, right? And we get asked a lot why we're not using that process. And I'm sure that we're not the only smaller company that gets asked about.
Because you're not buying enough models.
But while that process is good and it's great for the companies and it's great for mass marketing, it also means that your model gets broken up into a lot of little parts.
Yes.
Because because you have to be able to unmold the model. So we're talking undercuts now, and this is kind of technical, but if you've got 2 halves of a mold, you have to be able to pull the top half off without it catching on all the folds and the hands.
or have a machine do it if you're sophisticated.
Or have a really expensive
Really
multi-part
expensive.
mold that pulls out you can't see my hands moving, from all the different angles, which become really expensive. Those we're talking,
Right. We don't have the machines. We have a line of underage kids, right? Like 12-year-old kids that are buying these up.
No, we have Matt.
basically me. But
He actually got underage.
yeah,
Okay.
He can play one on TV.
but what you get then is the traditional model figure where the arm is where you're gluing both arms on, you're gluing
Right.
both legs on, you're gluing the rifle in, you're putting a hat on the guy, and you're trading mold lines, which you don't get in injection molding, for the gaps in the arms that you'd
Seams.
have to fill
Right,
for the seams.
right.
So it's kind of a preference. You get that precision and you get the crispness of it, but you don't have a one-piece model. You don't have, you've got other modeling things to do if you're really
Right.
precise about filling and gaps. And
And
whatnot.
it's really interesting that you mentioned this, because I grew up with these multi-part kits, and putting them together has just always kind of been a little zen thing for me. But in the booth, people don't want multi-part kits.
Yeah.
For the most part, they want that single piece. And I've even seen where some of our folks that have bought from us will take their starter box home and they'll be like, these are in pieces. How do I put these together? So it's interesting that not only is there a preference for the kind of material that your figure's made from, but there's also a preference on whether or not you put it together yourself or it's as a piece.
And it's also what you're used to. If you are, let's say you back a Kickstarter, Kingdom Death or whatever, you you back some Kickstarter where the models were injection molded in China, Song by Some Fire.
But, you
You're
know,
buying a box and they're all assembled. And you're like, well, why can't these guys do?
Right.
You know, right? Well, we need the volume.
Yeah.
Would we?
Yeah.
Sure. Right?
and those are actually multi-part that have been partially assembled
Right.
by hand before they're put into boxes.
Yep.
by-
It's the great secret. Yeah. So,
Yeah, so they appear single piece, but they're not.
well, they're not single piece, but they are been assembled before they put in
Yeah.
the box.
Right.
So you're not doing it. The
Right.
customer is not doing it.
Right.
So then at the bottom end then is the traditional metal casting, which is generally done in a round rubber mold. And if you've never worked with rubber vulcanizes, so
Right.
you get, you melt it in the mold, you put a bunch of pressure on it, and eventually the rubber goes from being liquid to a solid. And anybody who's changed a tire knows that you can bend rubber, but you can't really bend rubber, right? And so you're allowed to, or you're able to have some undercuts, because as you peel that mold back, you can pop the miniature out and you can have a little bit of, volume where, behind a bag or underneath an arm or around a rifle or something like that. So you can have a little bit of extra geometry in terms of undercut, but generally you're doing pretty flat pose figures.
Right.
Think the Enchantress.
Yeah.
Hey, here I am in the t-shirt pose, because that's really easy to cast in metal.
Yeah.
The other thing about spin casting is that it uses centrifugal force to pull the metal from the center of the mold through the mold, and it throws the metal essentially counterclockwise on most machines into the cavities. So as you build that mold and you're placing the models in there, you're placing it so the arms are all pointing counterclockwise, so the metal flows into that.
Right.
And then you potentially have problem getting metal up into the right hand if it's off at a weird angle. So you might see that arm cut off and put as a separate piece.
Right.
Because of the process. Now, the more expensive ones, have automatic pressure, and they've got some injection pressure component to it to assist the spin cast if you're at the high end. Smaller companies generally. So
We are
so
the
you're
small
finding
company.
that.
We are mighty and small,
Small,
and you can't
yeah.
kill us because everybody's trying.
That's right.
So,
Like cockroaches.
Just like.
So you still have some having to take that model and break it into pieces if you want something super dynamic, something that looks like it's in action and you're not just doing lollipop,
Right.
T-shirt figures. And I think we really pushed the limit on some of the metal casting. Some of our sculpts are pretty dynamic.
They are. They're awesome.
even in metal. Then so Siocast sort of fits in the middle. It allows, because it's a silicone mold that's able to now withstand the temperatures that old silicone wouldn't have. The new silicons are at the point where they can both take the heat of the casting process, because you're basically dumping hot plastic into it.
Right.
They can survive that for longer than the rubber molds could, so you get a longer life out of the molds. But also it's super flexible, so you can get really deep undercuts. And so there's some things I'm doing, like with the war jackal, where the war jackal is essentially looking over his
Yeah,
left
head
shoulder
turn.
to the
Yeah.
back. Couldn't have done that in
Metal.
without making it two parts, because you couldn't have demolded it.
Right.
And even if you could, I don't know that you could have thrown the metal back up in that odd direction.
face would have
because
been a
it's
block.
cool. Yeah.
Yeah.
So it allows you to do some things modeling wise. Some of our horses where we're not having to cut the legs off, because I can put a flap in between the legs, and so the legs can be together instead of, the offset traditional metal model horse running pose.
Right.
So some of our horses now have some different geometries, and we don't have to have the two halves of a horse.
Because the dictator has decreed.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
We have to get the horses right, or
Yeah,
We're all in trouble.
we get stabbed. So now those are things that the general, consumer probably has no idea, but I sit around and go, I achieved it. They'll never know. I just did something amazing. And I go brag to the other guys who make molds, and we show each other our artwork and go, hey, That's possible. And then the
Customer's like, "This model sucks."
Yeah, and then the customer's like, oh, there's a seam line on the bottom of the model.
Yeah.
I'm like, yeah, okay. So it could have been two halves of a horse, and you could have had to fill the whole gap along the whole back.
So
And
just
figured,
running a sharp knife over
Yeah.
whatever and be done with it.
yeah, figure out how to glue the tail on and
Yeah.
keep it from breaking off. So there's
Guess who's made that model? Oh my gosh.
so so the Siocast fits in the middle in terms of production. But but you're going to get some mold lines on the Siocast that you're not going to get in the injection mold, and vice versa. So it really is kind of a trade-off. It's a trade-off between the precision and how many parts it is, and then also a trade-off for the company on what technology can we afford and how can we make it.
Sure.
How can we grow and still provide good
And
models?
to add, from a purely business standpoint, I just want to have a note here to add that in addition to all those considerations and having to weigh those choices, we own this thing.
Yeah.
We are not contracting out to someone else to make our models for us. It's done, internally through the partnership with DGS and Laser Treatment.
Right. So
So-
it's basically a house. We
Essentially in-house. So
process.
there's a business relationship there, but it's essentially.
Right. It's two houses but a really short distance in between.
Yeah, there's a underground.
Yeah, great. Yeah, I got a foot in each. But what it is doing is letting us shorten the time from concept development to production.
Yes.
Because we're getting rid of shipping and sending back and forth, and we're doing our own QC, and we can
Right.
check that the master is right, and then when you throw in 3D printing too, and the quality of the 3D prints that are out now are letting us go straight from a 3D sculpted file to a master into a mold without having to make master models and then create a
Ship
master
back,
mold, ship back,
yeah.
and then create a production mold after we accepted masters. We're able to go straight from 3D prints into a production mold with a higher quality. And I think you look at some of the newer models we've done, the Trapper,
Yeah.
They're incredible.
Scrounger, some of them.
Oh, it's ground. All of it's
I
ground.
mean, and then you go back and those all start with an STL 3D sculpt. The other part of the process we're doing is taking all our original ones. So, grabbing the Duelist and the Highwaymen and some of those, and which were all
Night of Vassal.
Night of Vassal. Oh, that one. Don't
Oh.
even start with that, John. And we're taking those that were all physical sculpts and there is no STL file, and we're redoing those in Siocast.
Right.
In some cases, we'll be able to potentially merge parts back on that we, because they were metal and the undercut was a problem. We now may be able to merge a few parts together and have some models that don't have quite as many pieces because of Siocast.
Right.
As we learn more about what we can get away with and what we can't. So we've got the problem of keeping up with new production, putting out great new stuff, and then also redoing our library of older stuff.
And it's gonna be a little bit unchained once we get past the conversion process. We're gonna be able to do a lot
Completely
more.
unchained.
Yeah.
Great part of Matt's workflow,
Yeah.
Matt Green's workflow, because a room full of Matt's ago, is to the conversion from the old line to the new material. Some of those models we don't want to make them again that way,
Problematic.
right? So we're not going to make them that way again, meaning that sculpt, right? Some that we can scan,
Yeah.
get an STL file out of. Some that we can significantly reduce the challenges in terms of assembly and the number of pieces involved. Keshark, I'm looking at you, Night of Vassal,
Right.
Yeah.
it's Jackie Chaser,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
War Spider, all can be done better, and we're going to work on it. But if Matt was released from conversion, we get past that process. Just think about it.
Sky's the
We're
limit.
going to be able to accomplish it.
But that's not happening anytime in the next 2 months.
Yeah.
It's probably,
Yeah.
it's hard to estimate it. And to some degree, the more we grow and the more we're doing production, the less I'm doing conversion, which is a good problem to have. It's probably another year and a half before we get
Clear enough.
Yeah, we've done most of it. I
Right.
mean, I think we've probably got, 250, 300 models in the range.
Just a little over
And I
200.
think about 80 to 100 of them are now Siocast, I think,
It's awesome.
something like that. So we've got some work to do.
Sure.
But it's going good. So now we've told you that we're making choices for you in terms of changing to plastic and going that direction. There are some things that are different about modeling in Siocast than in metal or in polystyrene,
Right.
traditional plastic,
Right.
like the glue you use.
Right, right.
So if you've put together models before, and you're used to the airplane glue from when we were kids, that will not work on Siocast.
Right.
Because
Use the
that,
same super glue you do on
Yeah.
metal.
so use super glue. Not the plastic cement. The plastic cement melts the polystyrene together,
Right.
as opposed to bonding it. So tried that, you're gonna get a sloppy mess. Haven't tried it. So that is something you should know if, to do it. Use a super glue. As part of the casting process, you use talcum powder to help the metal or help the plastic or metal, if you're doing spin casting, flow through the mold. So generally the models should be cleaned when you get them. You should just put them in hot water, a little bit of soap, and wash them to get the talcum powder off. That'll help whatever you use to prime it stick
better.
better and help the glues to stick together. Now, with that said, you don't have to prime Siocast. I've painted straight to it, and one of the good things about Siocast is it's super bendy, and the paint won't chip or flake off of it.
It doesn't. It sticks really well.
I've painted a bike we're not making it in Siocast yet, but I've got the
Felcar and pigment.
the Felcar and Pike
Mhm.
bike because I put it in a mold with something else to test it. But I painted one of those up, and you can tie it in a knot like a cherry stem, and make a knot out of it, and the paint doesn't
Right.
flake off.
It's
So,
Don't try this at home,
Yeah.
kids.
It's like
Man,
it absorbs into the
yeah,
plastic.
into the
Yeah.
plastic because back to that spongy sort of feel to it. Then the other thing is people talk about cleaning it, or scraping. So like, pewter guy, the old guys who sit around with metal models and love
Hey,
scraping
hey,
models.
hey. Hey,
Yeah.
yes, I'm wanting.
To get rid of the recede.
Yeah.
Some combination of file, which a lot of people like files, which works great on the metal, or a X-Acto knife blade. You'll see them basically scrape the mold line by putting the blade perpendicular to the model, and dragging the blade over the source of the model. That doesn't work as well with Siocast. It goes back to that burr problem of that, which was worse in the first version of it. All ours have been made with the Sio Hard, the newer stuff. So you can scrape, but that doesn't tend to work as well. I would go back to a carving method. You're gonna have to buy a sharp knife, so don't buy one mini.
Your
Buy
blade of exact zero needs to be kept sharp.
Yeah, and then you're basically razoring it, thin slices at a time. And I start small and just thinly slice off a little bit of that. It works pretty well. It's a little harder in some of the spots, but a file wasn't getting into some of the hard spots either. So
No.
so there's a little bit of that. So you may have to change your cleanup technique a little bit with this versus metal, but it's certainly not insurmountable. The other thing I'd say is it is a thermoplastic, which means that it can be reheated. Now, part of the goodness of that is I get to reuse about 30% of the scrap as recycled. So
That's awesome.
which is nice. But it also means that the model could be heated up and theoretically the plastic can go into another shape. So if you get a model where the spear or something, like you get it out of the clam and the spear is bent or not quite as straight, which happens in metal models too, you could put it in hot water, get it up to temperature, and then pull it back out, straighten it out, and let it cool, and it will go back into what's closer to the right shape on that. The plastic melts like melt for casting at about 230, 220, 230 degrees.
Some boilers.
So
Yeah.
Probably.
so you
boil
so you can still, I mean, you can even boil it at 100 and you're probably, it's not going to melt into a blob, but so don't, I wouldn't put it on with your evening tea, but you can use some pretty hot water to get it in the melting.
If you can stand it, so can your mom.
Yeah. So those are just some things to kind of think about is, use the right glue, clean it beforehand to get the talc off. Clean it up as you need to, and then if you need to reshape a part, you can put it in super hot water and let it cool. I would also say, if it's really, really cold where you live, if you keep your models in your car and you plan on playing them, bring it inside and let it kind of get to your room temperature, because at some point, at extreme low temperatures, it can get a little brittle.
Brittle,
too.
right.
So,
Extreme low, but yes.
yeah, I mean, not like, not like zero, but if you're living up in Canada,
Minnesota low.
yeah, and we've got a couple players up there that we love.
Just a couple, not
Yeah.
not all.
But if you're living in a place of stream and your minis are living in the trunk of your car at sub 30-degree weather, be kind to your miniatures and let them get the room temperature again.
You're on the set of the thing.
Yeah.
You need to give them a break.
If you're cold, they're cold.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, taking care of your minis. But
We're a little low on time. There's one thing I want to add back.
Yeah, go for it.
Because he hasn't got it. From a business standpoint. Matt's covered all the great points. I think we're doing a video somewhere where Jeff is going to show some of these techniques.
cleaning,
Right, working on that. Okay. That's important. I also want to say this because I just don't think it gets said enough. And we work really hard to give value to our customers. We went from, a piece of concept art, sculptor physically sculpts it. The physical sculpt comes to us. We take that, we make a master, we send it off, we make a master mold. Masters come back, we clean those, masters go back to the foundry, blah, blah, blah steps. Now the person is sculpting 3D, in ZBrush or whatever the program is. We're getting an STL. We can make modifications in seconds.
Right.
Because the person can show us, oh, I really like that arm closer to the body. Bing. It takes seconds to do it. So I got to break the arm off the armature or whatever. Okay. That gets printed in a high-res printer. That prints the master. So it's printed here inside DGS. That prints the master. Those go to you. We make a master when we start making the models. I would challenge our listeners to find me a miniatures company that dropped their prices in the last 5 to 10 years. Okay. Right. Where our models that we're selling for $9.99 in metal, we are selling them when they come out in plastic, a single, a standard model, 25 mil base model for $7.99.
Yeah.
Because we were able to take a whole bunch of the pieces of that process, and we could have left it.
Sure.
Right. And we could also be running with a super markup, way over the cost. And it's one of the challenges of this business is I know now exactly what it takes to make these models, but I'm also a gamer. And I go buy some, I'm like, oh. And I knew I was. Now I know by how much. Right? Yeah. So, but I would tell you that's a challenge. There might be somebody else out there. I don't know of them. Right. We have done price increases when our metal costs were increasing over time over the past several years when we're making metal. But the first time I've ever encountered a situation where, hey, we got some significant deficiencies in this. We're going to pass this on. Probably can't do it forever, but to make the statement about how much we know what an issue this is to our customers to do what this wants as we transition. Yeah. I think it needs to get talked about because nobody else does it.
I agree. I agree.
So. And we're not going to talk about the arrival of the machine in the garage and all the impacts that had. Emphasis on impact.
No, we're not.
Okay.
That's a sore point.
I want to relate the moment we built the ramp. But you know what? We're gonna ask it back.
Absolutely.
I think there's a lot to talk about.
There's a ton. I have 2 or 3 questions.
Right. I know you do. Right. And I think that I'll do that. Yes. We'll bring it back because of those. And listeners, it's just so much in this, in a 30-ish minute, podcast. We're not going to get to all the key things. Give us the questions that you had that didn't get answered by this.
Right.
And we will bring Matt back and we will put those in front of us and have that as part of the podcast. Part two. Okay. When you come back to this again, and we will talk about the arrival of the so,
all right.
Over to Matt Prime, Matt Gooch.
Matt Green, it was great to have you here today.
Yes.
And to all of our listeners, thank you very much. It's good to be back, and we hope that you're happy we're back too. Give us a listen, give it a like wherever it is that you're listening to it. As John said, drop questions and comments right there where you're listening. And until next time, we'll see you around the table.
Spike and win.
There you go. Buy more toys.
Buy more toys.